You just requested an IEP meeting for special education services. Now what? Most parents sit down at that table completely unprepared, and the schools are counting on that. In today's podcast, I'm going to tell you exactly what happens after you make that request and what you need to do before you ever walk into that meeting. Hi, my name is Nick, and this is the SpED podcast. So, you just informed the school that you are concerned about your child's performance and you're requesting a meeting to get an IEP. This, just so we're clear, this should be done in writing. If you're requesting a meeting and you're not getting one, it's most likely because you are asking in person or over the phone or something along those lines. Put it in writing, an email to the school. You can email your child's teacher, but better yet, you probably want to email one of the administrators. You are not going above the teacher's head, but you can really hold people accountable, especially the administrators, because they should absolutely know that there should be a meeting to be held when you request one. So assuming you've done that, you've sent an email, I'm very concerned about my child, I think they may have a disability, or I think they need some extra help, however you word it. You've requested the meeting, and they're obliged to give you one. Depending on the state that you live in, they have a certain amount of days that they have to get this whole process done. And what does this whole process mean? We're going to make some assumptions here just so we have some time to work with. Let's say that you've requested the meeting. There needs to be an evaluation that takes place. So your child needs to be tested. There needs to be reports written up about those evaluations. You need to have time to review those evaluations. The team needs to meet and make a determination of eligibility, and I'm using that language specifically. We'll get back to that. And then develop an IEP, all within a certain amount of days. In Connecticut, it's 45 school days. In New York, it's 60 calendar days. Different states have different requirements. So check out what yours are. But all of that needs to get done from the day you send the email, from the day you request it, okay? So a clock is ticking as soon as you send that email. So let's back up. You've requested the meeting. You've requested an initial meeting, an initial IEP meeting. And at that meeting, they're going to decide if they're going to do an evaluation or not on your child. This is something that I get calls about all the time with parents, and I've sat in these meetings. This is one of the more straightforward meetings. Let me put it that way. I don't want to say easy, but straightforward. If certain things are true, typically, if you have certain things, certain aspects of your knowledge about your child, it's pretty easy to get the actual testing. But schools don't want to do the testing, and they will say no. I've been in many meetings where they have said no, and then I have gotten to them to say yes very shortly after. But certain things were true, and I'll go over that. And this is the kind of thing the schools don't want you to know about. Okay, so first thing, there needs to be the suspicion of a disability but that's the major thing, is that there's a suspicion of a disability and there's actual struggle happening in the school. And the language that you can use to really make sure that you get this testing done is something called child find. So all public school districts in the United States that receive federal funding, and to know if they receive federal funding, it means they receive funding from the state receives money from the federal government, so they receive federal funding, which is all public schools. They have to provide IDEA services, so Individuals with Disabilities Education Act services, special education services. And in that law, in that regulation, there is something called Child Find. And what Child Find is districts have a responsibility to seek out children aged, I think it's 3 to 21, it might be 5 to 21. But either way, they have to go out and seek them, like active, not passively. They actively have to seek out children who have the suspicion of a disability and then evaluate them to determine if they require special education services. So that is called Child Find. So how do we use this? If your child already has a medical diagnosis of a disability, especially one that falls under IDEA, so you have to go look that up, but I don't have it memorized off the top of my head, but things like ADHD, specific learning disability or learning disability, SLD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, a generalized anxiety disorder, some kind of emotional disability, autism, Down syndrome, intellectual disability, any of these things, right? They all. Then there's much more that fall, deafness, blindness, etc. The hard of seeing, hard of hearing, there physical disabilities. There's other things that fall under IDEA. If you have one of those already, like on paper from a doctor, there's more than suspicion of a disability. Your child has a disability. Now that's different. A medical diagnosis is different than an educational diagnosis, but it pretty much guarantees you that you will get at least the evaluation done. So when you go in and you start discussing, should we test or not? I wouldn't open with this, but I've been in meetings where I've had to use it. I had one recently, back in December or November or October. I don't remember. It was earlier this school year. So 2025, 26, earlier this school year. I was working with a high school student, and they're doing really well, but they clearly, they have ADHD, like on paper, and there's clearly something going on that's preventing that child from being successful in the classroom, at least to like where she should be, right? Something is holding her back. So my first strategy is always to ask questions that the school can't answer. Because if you can ask questions the school can't answer, then most likely an evaluation is warranted. There's a struggle happening. We don't know why. We need to do testing to figure that out. That's the first kind of approach that I take as an advocate in these meetings. But again, districts, for whatever reason, they don't want to test kids. I don't know if it's a money thing or time thing. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But it happens. So the district straight up said, no, we're not going to test her. She's got, A's and B's. There's no reason to test her. And so then I go, well, she has a medical diagnosis of ADHD. This is more than a suspicion of having a disability. She has a disability. Under Child Find, you guys are required to test her. And they go, okay, we'll test her, right? If that's what you guys want. I mean, they kept trying to say things like, if you really want us to, this and that, like, we don't think she needs it, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. The testing, there's a suspicion of disability. They have an obligation. They went and did it. That child ended up getting a 504 plan, which is what the family wanted anyways. None of us really thought that she needed a full-blown IEP, but that kind of goes in play as well. And she got the accommodations that she needed, and she's doing really well now. So it worked out. That is one tool, and a major tool. And that's why I'm saying it's generally a little easier if you already have a medical diagnosis. Now, if you don't have one, you can still use Child Find as a way to potentially get services. Now, you would have to have good evidence of some kind of disability or potentially of some kind of disability to make that same argument. But at the same time, if there's a suspicion, hey, I think my kid has dyslexia. They are really struggling to read. You guys have been working, you've been doing reading interventions or this and that, and it's not working. I think there might be a disability here. That's a suspicion. They should get testing done, okay? So it's really important to understand that aspect of it. And now the whole timeline of things, I went over it earlier, how it works. So remember, the day that you send that email, you start a clock. Depending on your state, there's a certain amount of days that the school needs to decide if they're going to do testing, evaluate the child, and then determine eligibility and put an IEP into place. All that needs to be done within X amount of days. I'm just going to use Connecticut because it's one I'm familiar with, but I've been working with other states too. They just have different days. Find out whatever your state is. So literally just go to your state, go online, go to Google, just search in. I mean, if you did it for Connecticut, you could do Connecticut IEP evaluation process or something along those lines, and just find out what the days are for your state. Some are school days, some are calendar days. I forget what the federal one is off the top of my head. I think it's 60 days as well, but it's important to know. But you need to know it for the state that you're in. Using Connecticut as an example, it's 45 school days. So we'll use that just for ease of conversation about this. So let's say today is March 25th, and I put in an email, hey, I think my child is really struggling. I think they may have ADHD or a specific learning disability or something going on that they really need some help. I'd like to request an IEP meeting to discuss evaluations. A timeline is started the second I hit send. The second that goes off to the appropriate person, so the administrator at the school or the teacher at the school, a timeline is started. And the school now has 45 school days from today to get all that done. So the first thing, realistically, is they will typically hold a meeting within 5 to 10 days because they're on a timeline. They need to get this done, to have you come in and discuss what are we going to do and what tests are we going to administer if we are going to do testing. Okay, so first thing is, again, come armed with that child find, come armed with data or your, like, how are they struggling? Why are they struggling? One really good way, especially for my middle school and high school parents out there, is go look at their grades. And usually most districts nowadays have the grades on an online platform, and look at their test grades and their quiz grades. A lot of kids' grades nowadays are inflated from homework assignments, not so much anymore, but still like classroom participation, classroom work, things like that. And it balloons their grade. It makes their grades in the B or the A range, even though on testing quizzes, they might be performing a lot lower. That is something I see all the time, especially when parents are like, something's going on, I'm not quite sure what it is. I look at the grades just at face value, and it's like, she's getting A's and B's. But then when you go in, you see the tests are like in the D's, C's, sometimes F range, okay? Why is that important? The tests are the standard of what we're evaluating students on. Tests, essays, projects, things like that. This is the work production that students create or produce, for lack of a better word, to show what they know. So if they're struggling there, and average those out, like take all those grades out and then average those out and see what is their test or quiz grade. All of a sudden, someone who's getting an A in English is getting a D when it comes to all their essays and projects, or in science or social studies or whatever. Then you can say, hey, well, no, they're not doing well. Like these grades are overinflating and giving them a much higher grade than they should be getting. Okay, so that's one path that I would take. Another one is, just your experience with them. Like, can they read? Are they struggling with reading? Are they struggling with math? Is it taking them forever to do the homework at night? All these kind of things. The school's going to ask you things like, well, are they on an undistracted environment, this and that? Like, do they have their phone, blah, blah, blah. And those are valid questions, but just be prepared for those things. Be prepared for them to ask you a bunch of questions like that. Ideally, they're not distracted, but if they are, I mean, that might be what's preventing them from doing well on their homework. That's a valid question. That's a valid critique. So things to consider. So you request the meeting, you have that initial meeting, okay? The initial IEP meeting. Let's say that the school, everybody's like, yeah, we do suspect something's going on. Let's do some testing to see if there truly is, okay? So then you're going to decide on what kind of testing you're going to do. By default, at least in my experience, you're almost every time I've ever done an evaluation or been part of one, both as a teacher and an advocate, the two that you're always going to get is a cognitive evaluation or a neuropsychological evaluation, which is going to test things like, as we classically know, like somebody's IQ or their cognitive processing speed, neuroflexibility, things like this. Okay. If you don't know what this means, it'll be in a good report. It should be explained, and you also should have the opportunity to speak with the evaluator. So you have a cognitive assessment and then an academic assessment. So reading, writing, math, some kind of evaluation that covers those areas, and then you'll also have other evaluations depending on the concerns that you have for the child. So if we're looking at a child that may have a speech impediment or some kind of communication issue, you're probably looking at speech testing. If we're looking at a child who has some gross motor deficits, right? Being able to navigate the school. We might be looking at a gross motor assessment or physical therapy assessment, essentially. Someone who's struggling with handwriting or manipulating objects or cutting things, or sensory needs. We're looking at an occupational therapy evaluation or an OT evaluation. And there's more, right? There's other things too. There's one specific for attention. There's rating scales. There's behavior ones. There's a bunch of things that can be done. And once you get the yes, generally the school, in my experience, the schools will do what they're supposed to do. But come prepared to the meeting with all of the things, all of the concerns that you have, okay? Another powerful tool, I've talked about this in previous podcasts, but creating a prepared written statement. You're the one calling the meeting, right? You're the one that has called the meeting. My child is struggling, all right? If the school can call the meeting too. If they called it, you're probably good, right? Like if they called it, like they're gonna say, yeah, no, we see the child struggling. That's why we called the meeting. But if you call the meeting, you need to walk in there prepared because they're gonna ask you. They're gonna ask you, what are you seeing? Okay, so before the meeting starts, write up exactly what you're seeing. Write up exactly what your concerns are. And write up your data. Put everything together in a written format so you're not struggling or jumbling your words like I do sometimes on the show. And you can just go in and clearly state your concerns in your message, okay? So you request the meeting, you go in, you read off everything. The team says yes. We decide what evaluations are done, okay? Now, this is important. The timeline now pauses. Once they agree, the timeline pauses until you give consent, or if you don't give consent after a certain amount of days, it'll lapse and then this whole process stops. So I don't know what that again changes per state. I've never had that happen as an advocate because I'm like helping people get it, so they're usually on top of this. But I've seen it happen. I have seen it happen. So it pauses. So you need to sign that ASAP. A good school will have you sign it right then and there. As everything's getting more automated and digital with the whole IEP process, you may get an email where you have to e-sign. Honestly, I would sit there and take out your phone and be like, I'm waiting for it. Or if they're like, we need to put it together, they'll send it later. That's fine, but they should be able to do it right then and there, unless something weird's going on. Like, we didn't expect that you were going to do a speech evaluation. We don't have a speech pathologist here to represent that. We need to find out a little bit more information first. That's fine. It kind of depends on the situation. But otherwise, if everything's smooth, they should be able to provide you a consent document right there that you can sign, so there is no pause in the timeline. But there is a pause until you sign consent. Assuming you do, now here's the rest of that process. You are going to, the school receives the consent. They will then pull the child to test them. This does have to happen during school time. I've had many parents ask, like, can we do this after school, this and that. Hypothetically, they could do it, but realistically, no. And here's why. Teachers are hired and typically have contracted hours to work between, let's just say 8 and 3:30 or whatever it is, 7:30 and 4, whatever, right? That is when the testing can occur, only during that time. They cannot do it after. And they shouldn't, honestly. I mean, I know it can be frustrating that your child may be getting pulled from classes, but it's also not fair to the teachers, right? They're not getting paid any extra. And even if they were, it's still, I mean, that would have to be in agreement with the teacher. Now, there are some situations where we can work around that. I've seen testing get done over the summer. So, like, let's say you request testing in like June. We can, even though there's no school days happening, so this doesn't count against the timeline, you know, sometimes we can pay teachers to come in or pay psychologists to come in or whoever the service provider is to do the testing. That's a doable thing. But during the school year, they're going to get pulled from class. Typically, in my experience, and I always advocate for this, we don't pull kids from English and we don't pull kids from math. But every other class is fair game. Usually try to start with electives, which can suck sometimes, but like gym can be hit or miss. Some kids are like, yeah, get me out of gym, please. Some kids are like, this is the worst thing you could have done to me, which is probably not smart to pull them for testing. But like gym, music, art, things like that. And then social studies, science, if we're talking about the older kids, those would be like kind of the next thing. Math and English is usually a no-go, okay? Within reason, like if they're, I don't know, I never showed movies to kids that wasn't appropriate for what we were doing. Like I didn't just have a movie day, but if like they're having a movie day, then like, yeah, you could pull the kid within reason. So anyway, kid gets pulled, tested, gets all the testing done. Then all of those evaluators are going to write a report and send that out to you, the parent. Depending on the state, you have a right to receive that paperwork at least X amount of days before the meeting. Connecticut, it's 3 days before you come back to your next meeting. That meeting is called an eligibility determination meeting. I kind of led with it in the beginning, but that's the next meeting, okay? So you not only do you have that right, you also have a right to meet with the evaluator so they can explain the evaluation. Now, they cannot make any determinations at this pre-meeting, right? When you meet with the evaluators, you just have to email them out and request a meeting. They can't say like, yeah, your kid needs an IEP or not. They will not say that, and they should not say that. But if they do, that's great for you. But they probably are trained not to say things like that because they shouldn't. And they really shouldn't because that's a determination that the team needs to make, not just one individual. However, if they say it, that's good data for you or ammunition or however you want to think about it. But it is a time for you to ask about the testing experience of your child and how they did and ask the evaluator to explain the evaluation. Some of these things can be confusing for sure. Ask them how they go. I get to read them all the time, and I used to administer a lot. I've administered the academic ones, most of them a ton of times. So like those are really easy for me. I've memorized the test for the most part. So it's really easy for me to read through the academic ones. The cognitive ones, I've never administered because I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a licensed psychologist. So those I have experience with because I've just read them so many times, and I've gotten to sit down with psychologists over the years and understand them for my students. Like, what does this mean for my student? What does this score mean? And what does that score mean? And what does this test mean? And things like that. So ask them questions. Ask them whatever you need. Like, try to understand the test. Try to understand how your child did on it. What are the implications of it? They should be offering recommendations in the evaluation. Ask about those recommendations. Those are important. I'll get into now in a different episode what the eligibility determination meeting is and like everything that needs to happen there. But we're just going to make some assumptions that like we get yeses, okay? So you get your evaluations back. You have an opportunity to go over them. Please go over them, read them, understand them to the best of your ability. Then you come back to meet again. This is called an eligibility determination meeting. This is where you find out and you decide as a team if the child qualifies for special education or not. Again, I'll go over, that's a whole episode in and of itself. And this is, for what it's worth, the most difficult meeting that you're going to have in this whole process, because this is where they can more definitively say yes or no. You probably want a yes, but like, as I said earlier, sometimes we're just looking for a 504 plan. That's a different topic. So, we went through this testing. It doesn't really matter. So let's say they say yes. Depending on the district, one of two things will happen. Either they will combine that meeting now with your initial annual meeting. So what does that mean? When you receive special education services, you need to not at least once per year meet to update and create a new annual IEP, individualized education plan for your child. So your first annual will happen sometimes right then and there, and typically districts will do that. Typically districts will pair the eligibility determination meeting with the initial IEP meeting. I have experience, though, where we've had 3 separate meetings. So the initial planning meeting, like are we going to do evaluations, an eligibility determination meeting, and then an IEP meeting. And that's a whole other topic as well as IEP meetings. But remember, this whole thing, and if the child is found eligible, that IEP needs to be created before that timeline runs out. So you might be coming up close to that timeline. They need to have that. They need to have, not only does it need to be created, it needs to be implemented. So it needs to happen like pretty quickly. So Again, let's assume yeses, right? You got the yes to the eligibility. We found the disability. They need special education services. So we developed the IEP right then and there. Okay. That's another thing that you have to prep for as well. I'll get into it at another time. But that is the process, assuming that everything goes well. That is the process of getting yourself or getting your child an IEP. Okay. I didn't want you. It's really important to prepare for these meetings, and not walk in blind to them, because when I was a teacher, part of these meetings many times, and 90% of them, the parents were told, no, we're not going to test your child, because they didn't know these things. And quite frankly, I didn't know them either as a teacher. You got to keep in mind, as a special education teacher, I'm working with kids that have already been identified. So I typically am not part of the initial evaluation process because it's not something that I don't even know the child. Like, hypothetically speaking, let's say you request testing. I probably don't know that kid, or I might know them just from passing, but like I probably don't teach them. So I don't know anything about them. I have nothing really to contribute in that initial meeting as a special ed teacher. So I just kind of sit there and wait till if they say, yeah, we're going to do testing. And then I go, okay, yeah, I'm going to do an academic evaluation. I'm going to do reading, writing, math. And then I'm done talking. and I'm also like, I have to keep, I'm doing paperwork and things like that, because that's my job as a special education teacher. But as far as like knowledge about the child, it's minimal. I don't know much going on. So that's something important to keep in mind. But yeah, if you guys have any questions or concerns or anything, please leave a comment below. This is out on a few places. So if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment below. If you're watching this or listening to this on Spotify or Apple or wherever, leave a comment below. Or better yet, go to GSE Advocates. That's my Instagram handle. That's where I can really answer questions more directly. If it's on YouTube, I will see it. If it's on Spotify, I will see it. But I'm gonna be honest, I don't really check the other podcasts. But I mean, hey, I'm glad you're listening. Thank you for listening, wherever you're listening to. Yeah, if you guys enjoyed this, please give us a follow. This is the SpED podcast. We're available on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please give us a follow at GSE Advocates. That's my Greenwich Special Education Advocates. That's my personal advocacy business. Not personal, it's a business. But yeah, if you guys need help, if you need anything, email me, call me. My email is thespedspace@gmail.com. And yeah, have a great day.